Trust Lab Colloquium. So we are very happy to have Dr. Sruthi Sekar with us today. She's a postdoc at University of California, Berkeley currently. Before that, she did her PhD from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and she in both computer science and maths. And she has won several awards like the ACM India Doctoral Dissertation Honorable Mention, Professor P.L. Bhatnagar Medal from ISC, Commendation Certificate for Excellent PhD Thesis, Professor K. Venkatachalayangar Scholarship, the IDRBT Doctoral Colloquium Award, a TCS PhD Fellowship, and something called the Sandwich Scholarship. Today she'll be telling us about zk-SNARKs-as-a-service. So over to Sruthi.
Thank you. Thank you, Manoj, for the introduction, and thank you for having me here. I think like a few years back when I visited IIT Bombay, I was listening to a talk there, and today is the first time I'm getting to present here. So so today I'm going to be telling you about a recent work of ours, which is on building essentially zero-knowledge SNARKs as a service. I mean, as the name suggests, it's borrowed from the common literature term of software as a service, where we are instead now trying to do proof generation as a service. And this is joint work with Sanjam Garg, Arushi Goyal, Abhishek Jain, and Guru Vamsi Policharla. I'll get into the talk, but feel free to stop me at any point of time if you have any questions. Same applies to people online. If you could tell me, I'll answer the questions. Okay, so let's start with a intro about what are zk-SNARKs before heading into anything. So they are at heart like zero knowledge proofs. What are zero knowledge proofs? They are these protocols where a prover is essentially trying to prove to a verifier that some NP statement is true, and which means that it's trying to prove a statement of the form that there exists something called a witness W, such that this relation circuit, which takes in as input the statement and this witness, outputs 1. So this relation circuit outputs 1 if it's a valid statement and 0 otherwise. And the verifier, which just has the statement and does not have the witness, should be able to verify that the proof is correct or incorrect, and accept or reject just getting this proof. Okay, so this is a special circumstance where it's a non-interactive protocol, and we are just going to look at things where in one round single shot proof is sent. And so zk-SNARKs come with a lot of adjectives, and the abbreviation comes out to SNARK. So what does each of them stand for? So zk is zero knowledge, which is comes from the zero knowledge protocol itself, and what it says is this proof itself should not leak anything about the witness to the verifier. So just given the proof and the statement, the verifier will be able to verify, but will not learn anything more about the witness. Okay. Then succinctness, which is the key feature for SNARKs, and which is the desire for using them for any efficient solution, which essentially tells you that the verifier time should be much smaller than computing this relation circuit in itself. So typically something logarithmic in the size of the circuit. That's the desire for the succinctness. Then non-interactive, which I already mentioned, it will be a single shot message. So the feature of non-interactivity is that anyone can verify given this proof. So that's the non-interactive aspect of zk-SNARKs. And finally, I'm not going to get into details of what arguments of knowledge mean, but basically they capture some form of soundness guarantee against a prover who's trying to be fooling the verifier. So what this soundness guarantee tells you is that this proof will not get, your verifier will not accept a proof on an incorrect statement. So meaning if there is no witness, you cannot fool the verifier to accept the statement. So that's what soundness guarantee is. And combined with on a high level, all these features is what form a zero knowledge SNARK essentially. Okay, and since their introduction with the succinctness feature included, they have found several applications in literature. So I just wanted to list a few, and I'll get into talking about at least one of them as a running example for what we want to do. But essentially they're applied to something called anonymous credentials, which are used in several blockchain applications, verifiable inference of machine learning, private smart contracts, proving existence of bugs in codes, fighting disinformation, which is a non-blockchain application, which I'll talk about later in the talk, and then privacy preserving cryptocurrency like Zcash, etc. So there are some applications where zk-SNARKs actively occur, and hence no wonder in recent years there's just been numerous amount of research that has gone into building these with improved efficiency of different aspects with respect to verifier, prover, whatever you take. But the one key thing to note is, in spite of all this effort, there is still a gap in terms of the prover time. So I'll get to explaining what it means with respect to an example, but all I want to say is, like, in spite of all the effort, still the prover time in generating a SNARK proof remains, it still is like much larger than the relation circuit time in concrete sense, and like, so that prevents its use still in several applications where your relation circuit might be huge, and that's the context with which we are like starting off with and looking at. So just to place an example context, what I mean by this, right? What is an example where a circuit will be so large that the prover time of the existing SNARKs will be like so large that essentially you cannot use any of those. So this example is of fighting disinformation, which typically works for both images and videos, but let's work with videos, which is the larger one. So the problem is that we see a lot of video clips, images on news online, and one of the desired features is to be able to see if this is a valid image or some kind of malicious tampering has been done to it or not. So you want to be able to prove that only a valid set of edits have been made to the image or the video. And why can't this be done with existing cameras? Like, images these days come with some sort of signature appended, but that's not enough in some sense when you look at external editing of images through different softwares and stuff. Like, you cannot guarantee that those signatures on the images will still verify. So that's where zero knowledge proofs come in. And let's say there is some video clip where you're doing a bunch of edit operations that are allowed, and one of the operations that involves, it may be a sensitive video clip, and you may be editing to blur out some sensitive part. Okay, so this is an edit, let's say, you're doing. Then what the prover is trying to prove is a statement of the form that only these allowed set of edits have been made to the video, this clip. Okay, and that proof is what is sent to the verifier. Okay, so here what is the secret aspect? The video itself, in the process of doing so, like, there are sensitive parts of it, right? So that's the essentially secret part that you want to still be able to hide, and that's where zero knowledge comes in. But at the same time, like, you want to be able to generate a proof that's small enough for the verifier to just run through and not have to check something proportional to the circuit size, which is dependent on this huge massive video file, right? So just to give context, if it is a like good quality video file, even a 10-minute or 5-minute clip will be something of the range of 500 MB. If it's a good quality one, but like typically that's the setup we're looking at. So if you have large video files, proportionally the circuit size that you would consider of verifying something like this would be huge. And so, like, the proof, as I said, needs to be zero knowledge, because you want to hide the sensitive parts of it. And because the video sizes is large, typically the SNARK generation time will also be proportionally large, at least in the existing SNARKs that you have in practice. If you pick any of them, right now at least people don't know. For images, people know how to use. There have been works that have shown how to use this for images, for fighting disinformation, but for video there is still a gap, and this needs work. Okay, so with this running example, the question we ask is, yeah.
So if you relax any of the objectives, so then have like sufficient for
for instance, you don't care about zero knowledge? Still you don't have. Yeah, like just proofs also you don't have for video editing. But for video editing, typically I think the application that they are looking at for fighting disinformation requires zero knowledge actually. They can't give up, like, I mean, if you look at any blockchain application, there are applications where you can ignore the zero knowledge. But for video editing and this kind of stuff, fighting disinformation, zero knowledge is a key aspect they want to retain, which makes it harder. Okay, so yeah, the question that we ask from here is, like, can we actually do the SNARK computation by delegating it? Okay, so of course, like, here is a simplistic solution where you're just able to use some cloud service. There is like a lot of cloud service with high compute capacity now, and you might wonder, like, just send the video, get the proof, and the cloud will compute it for you. But as you can see, this violates the basic principle we want to keep, which is the privacy aspect, right? We want to delegate but not lose out on the privacy. I don't want to still leak the whole video to even the cloud server. It's not just with respect to the verifier. You want to also retain the privacy with respect to this. And so that's why instead what we envision is being able to do this in a way that you delegate it to a group of servers who can run essentially an MPC to compute this proof. And for this, the client essentially will secret share the witness, or as we'll get to later, it's extended witness if you look at it in the sense of how the SNARKs function. But essentially the client will secret share and the servers will not have the whole witness. They will just keep a share of the witness and they'll do an MPC computation that achieves the efficiency, hopefully, that we'll look at what it is. It's able to split, and with that it's able to compute and give you. So with respect to the client itself, besides computing the shares of the witness, there is no other work. You're essentially delegating the whole proof computation to the servers. But with respect to the servers also, you want to keep the cost in mind, and so we'll get to what that requirement is in a bit. But that's the essentially question we are answering. And this is not like a framework that's first looked at by us. This is essentially what the work of collaborative zk-SNARKs by Özdemir and Bonnet they did in Usenix 2022. So, yeah.
Maybe you can proceed with your question.
Yeah, Shruti, you said the client has to secret share.
Maybe I can.
The size and the
Sorry, Chaya, I think there was a echo. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, let me try again. So you said the client has to secret share the extended witness.
Extended witness, yeah.
The client is doing work that is asymptotically linear in the size of the circuit and not just the witness?
Yes, so that part of it we are not focusing on, but you can think of that part also as being done using an MPC. You can think of that being also shared and done. At this stage we are not looking at, but the key aspect I want to point here, which I'll talk about later, is that part, even if you think of it as proportional to the extended witness size, it's much lighter operations than what appears in the actual SNARK proof generation. So the cryptographic operations and the group operations are much heavier in comparison. So if you are able to get that delegated, that in itself is a huge save on the cost.
Okay.
And
circuit size operations, but not group operations or exponentiation.
yes, yeah.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is using homomorphic encryption more efficient than MPC?
Homomorphic encryption, I don't know how you would fit into this.
What's the whole purpose of coming up with untrusted data?
Yeah, but concretely efficient, yeah, you'd have to check with respect to the numbers and how you should be able to compute the proof in order of seconds and probably minutes if it's a really large circuit, but not to the extent that it takes a day or more, right? So that's the goal typically. Okay, so I was saying, this was already introduced as a framework in this work of collaborative zk-SNARK, where they essentially, set up the security notion for how to do this MPC computation, what are the kind of privacy guarantees that you want, and they formalize and also give a collaborative zk proof for this. So just to elaborate a little bit more, yeah. So the collaborative zk-SNARK work is where they essentially, as I said, formalize this concept and they build an efficient MPC to compute zk-SNARK proof that preserves the privacy with respect to the client. So the client's witness remains private from the servers, a bunch of corrupted servers, as well as from the verifier. But what it does not do is the essentially split of the work among servers. So their goal was to essentially, this in itself is a big deal, because trying to use MPC for something like this is not something that was looked at with respect to proof. So this is in itself a huge step, but they were able to show that each server in this MPC takes as much compute time as a single prover. So each server will not do more work than what a single prover does, and you would be able to delegate this work. So you can still envision this being useful in scenarios where you just want your client is a low power machine and you're just wanting to delegate, but you don't particularly care about reducing the work of the servers. Okay. And on the other hand, there is a prior work which is called distributed zero knowledge proof system, and their goal was to distribute the work across machines in a compute cluster to get faster proof generation. So in other words, they're able to get the divide amongst the server, but they don't care about privacy. So they don't get the aspect of having the privacy of the witness against malicious servers. So in some sense, we are trying to combine, the best features of both in a way, like where you're able to retain the privacy of this while also getting the divide in some form.
So in these kind of constructions, does the client leave the servers or
The client, no, so the client just sends once the shares. The servers will do, but there is another work where the model is different. I'll talk about it. There's a concurrent work where the client also needs to be online. I guess it's application scenario wise, it's not comparable. Probably you would not want the client to be online. You just give it and then they give you the proof. That's the kind of thing that works better for application, I feel.
that noticeably reduce the computation
Amongst
amongst everyone?
everyone, the lesser the communication you want back and forth with the client, it's better for, overall the time, clock time, right? So that's the goal. Like, you don't want too many communication. Even within the servers, as I would get to later, it will be a star topology. You would not have like cross communication amongst all servers with each other. Okay, so like given that, as I said, our result essentially is about getting faster proof generation, amongst the servers, getting some divide, and still be able to do it in a privacy preserving way that guarantees whatever the previous work of collaborative zk-SNARKs did. Okay, so for that, like the first stage is we formally define the framework, which is what we call zk-SNARKs-as-a-service, zk-SaaS in short, and this is for like we formalize how to do this privacy preserving delegation of the SNARK computation, and each server will be expected to run for a shorter duration than a local single prover. So it's not that it runs in the same time, that is what collaborative zk-SNARKs did, but here each server will run for a shorter duration of time, as we would see. Okay, and then we'll design the zk-SaaS for 3 specific zk-SNARKs that are widely used in literature. So Groth 16, Marlin and Plonk, which is also the 3 protocols for which collaborative zk-SNARKs showed their work on. And these are like widely used, and Plonk and its variants are like, I think, one of the widely used SNARKs in literature for applications. So we're going with that, and we show implement a prototype of zk-SaaS for Groth 16 and Plonk, and we're able to get essentially a 22x speed up over a local, like just a single prover if you consider. Over that, instead of with this divide amongst the servers, if we took the setup of like 128 servers, then we're able to get a 22x speed up essentially. And this is for the particular setup where Groth has like 2 power 25 constraints and Plonk has 2 power 21 gates. So I'll talk about the details of this, but this is just to give you a glimpse of what our results are in this setup. Okay, so here like I just want to mention the concurrent work, which also sort of brings up the question you had, Varun. So this concurrent work also is to appear at Usenix, and they also wanted to do the same essentially private delegation of zk-SNARKs for faster proof generation, but their model is quite different from ours. So I just wanted to point out what is the difference, and maybe it's useful in some setup, I don't see it. So the thing that they assume is the client is always online. Client you assume to be one of the members of the MPC compute. So the client is also doing active communication with the servers, and in that model, like what you're trying to do is reduce the work of the client. Okay, so it's not so much that you're getting the split amongst the servers, you're just trying to reduce the client's work as compared to what it would have done if the client itself generated the proof. That's the goal there. They don't get perfect, like they don't get as much divide amongst the servers, and they work with like a single example. But I would say that the good part is they're able to get malicious security. Our protocol as of now, like we believe you can extend it to malicious security, but it works for semi-honest setting. Yeah. Okay, so in comparison, like in our case, the client only needs to share the extended witness, and then yeah, so I'll get to the model, but semi-honest with respect to the servers. So the MPC compute that you're doing, they're like the servers, we don't assume malicious corruption of the servers.
I guess the verifier doesn't trust somebody, the prover trusts somebody.
Yeah.
Because otherwise they could have just checked and told the verifier.
Right. Yeah. Okay, and yeah, like with respect to this comparison, we are able to delegate the work entirely amongst the servers essentially. The client doesn't need to do any work, post it shares the witness. Okay, so with that I'm ready to like just talk about more about the framework itself. How does this framework work? So for that, like if you just look at typical zk-SNARKs compute, right? On a high level, like there are two major steps that go into it. So you're given this circuit, I mean there is this statement and a witness, and using that there is a phase where you compute this extended witness, which is essentially like you do the compute of the circuit and all the intermediate value of the wire. Roughly that is what is contained in the extended witness, and its size will be somewhat like proportional to the size of the circuit. You can imagine like that. But once this step is done, then you do the generating of the proof itself. And this component has like, as I mentioned to Chaya, like two components. One is the cryptographic operations, which would involve group exponentiations, pairing operations, and those are like typically much heavier. They're more expensive to do as comparison to the field operations, which would involve operations on polynomials and stuff. We'll look at what exactly are the group operations, but that's typically the trend, and we'll see that in numbers as well. Like if you see, there's a massive difference between how much of your slowdown happens due to cryptographic operations versus field operations. So even if that's why I said like this is not the focus either in our work or collaborative zk-SNARK. The focus is not on the compute of the extended witness part, which is why like you assume that the client is the one that computes step 1 and secret shares this extended witness. But you can think of that part also as being done using an MPC, and you can further exploit certain things about the relation circuit. So let's say if your relation circuit had repetitions and all, there are MPC protocols that exploit repetitions and are able to generate order C MPC protocols for them. So you can think of like running some MPC protocol to do that compute, but that's not the focus of, or that's not the target of what we are trying to reduce. What we are trying to reduce is the next part. Once you share the extended witness, these servers will essentially use essentially some pre-processing, which is like common shared correlated randomness, and they will collectively compute the step 2, which is generating the proof. Okay, yeah.
We are assuming honest majority of the servers, like any
We'll get to it, like the corruption threshold and stuff I'll get to, but yeah, it is semi-honest setting is what we are going to look at for this, and further on, like there is not a complete split of both operations. So the good part is the cryptographic operations that are heavy, they are completely equally divided amongst all the servers. So which means that whatever is the work for generating the single proof and the number of cryptographic operations that you count, that essentially gets split amongst however many servers you use. So you're getting that much divide for the heavier compute. However, for the field operation, due to one very specific component in the proof, which as a follow-up is an interesting thing to get rid of, we need this asymmetry in the power of the servers. So there needs to be one king server who essentially does work linear in the number of field operations, but all the remaining smaller servers, which you can think of like commodity laptops, don't have that much power. They essentially are able to get an equal divide amongst for the field operations also. So as I said, like here also again, if you see, the king is doing linear work, proportional field operation, you're not getting the divide, but in number sense, like we still get a speed up because they are not the heavy part in the SNARK generation, as we'll see. But of course it's an interesting follow-up to get rid of this asymmetry as well. Okay, so the kind of applications that we envision, like the use of this framework for, is on one side like applications where you envision the users having some mobile device, they don't have the kind of compute power to generate the proofs. So some of the applications include, let's say, like to prove computations on smart contracts, or like to prove some statements involving Ethereum wallet. So typically the user is some mobile device and is trying to get this. So you can think of this as a service that essentially takes this shared witness from the client and is able to generate proof and give it back to the client. That's the kind of example that we are envisioning zk-SaaS to work for. And on the other hand, applications, one of which I spoke about, is fighting disinformation, and similarly like verifiable private ML inference, where the learning model might itself be huge. So for these kind of applications, again, like you can envision this being useful, where typically your relation circuit is very large. Okay. So with that, I'm like ready to get into the designing part of zk-SaaS. If you have any questions about the framework itself, like I can take it now.
So what is the memory? You said the speed up was 22x, right?
Yes. So the memory also, because there is this asymmetry, the memory gets split amongst all the weaker servers. The memory is perfectly split. The king server still needs memory proportional to the size of the linear in the essentially size of the linear in the field operations, like those many.
And by cryptographic operations, you mean FFTs and
No, cryptographic operations, I mean group exponentiations and pairing operations essentially. FFTs are still like you're doing field operations only, right? Because you're doing it over polynomials, over fields. So FFTs are actually the field operation, but it's because of FFTs that we need this asymmetry, which I'll get to in the talk. But
does the prover need to do pairing operations?
because the SNARK proof generation, for the SNARKs that we are looking at, those SNARKs itself rely on like pairing assumptions. So the proof generation of those SNARKs involves an operation which I'll get to in the design part. What are the exact operations that go into the SNARK proof building? One of those operations involves group exponentiations and being able to do pairing on them. But the part that we need to get, the pairing is only done by the verifier. Prover doesn't have to do it. So that's not the aspect that we are going to divide. Just the group exponentiation part is the heavy part with respect to, that's what I refer to as cryptographic application.
There's a question in the
Yeah.
chat. How does the speed achieved here compare to the lead and time towards marks, like breakdown?
Oh, so breakdown doesn't achieve this kind of, so breakdown is linear time prover, that's true. I think it's not like it's not a direct, I don't know who asked the question. Chaya asked the question, yeah. So Chaya, like breakdown essentially, it's not I think a direct comparison of sort. It does achieve linear prover time, but I would say like for those SNARKs, still if you concretely look at numbers, this would perform better like with respect to if you say take Plonk. And also like the proof size is smaller, right? Breakdown will have like a larger, I think a log or some polylog blow up in the proof size if I'm correct. Yeah. So that's the trade-off I would say. So it's basically like kind of a trade-off. But the end goal, which is like to get rid of that asymmetric server, actually we are looking at protocols with linear prover time and probably trying to actually adapt zk-SaaS for those. That would be the like ideal goal, right? In which we are able to take in the best from those schemes and still able to adapt this split even in that prover time. So that's the kind of, yeah, I think the end target.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so with respect to the designing part, like the basic blueprint is something we borrow from what the previous paper of collaborative zk-SNARKs did, which is to identify the basic building blocks that go into these SNARK proof generation. There will be some sub functionalities that you can identify, which is what comprises of the proof generation, and then you design targeted MPC for each of the building block. So just as a quick sanity check, why can't you use any off-the-shelf MPC? There are very concretely efficient MPC protocols. Well, there is like there are some works that show essentially if you pick any MPC and try to do this, you will have at least 1000x speed slowdown to what like 1000x slowdown over computing the relation circuit itself. So it's not a good idea to do it. Just run any off-the-shelf MPC. You need to design like specific MPC protocols for the functionalities that we target. And like essentially combining these two, you will get the zk-SaaS for the corresponding zk-SNARK that we are targeting. So there are 3 SNARKs we target and identify the building blocks in them essentially. Okay, so what are the building blocks? These are essentially all the operations that you need to do the SNARK computation. Okay, so the only component that involves the group operations, which I call the cryptographic operation, is this functionality, which is called multiscalar multiplication, which just takes like m group elements and m field elements and generates product of their exponentiations. So this is the only component that uses the cryptographic operation, but this is the heavy part. Like there are several calls to this MSM function made in a proof generation, and if you look at proofs, for those who know, like there are 2 components, which is the IOP part and then the commitment part. So this appears mostly in the commitment part. IOP itself is information theoretic typically. So, and the number of calls made to this is large enough for it to blow up the size, blow up the compute time essentially. And the remaining 3 operations are all over just field elements. So there is something called partial products, which is only needed with respect to Plonk, not with respect to Groth or Marlin. And this just involves computing, as the name suggests, partial products. So given M elements, you just compute all the partial products on these M elements. And the other heavily used tool for these particular SNARKs is fast Fourier transform, which involves converting between coefficient and evaluation representation of the polynomials. Okay, and once you get FFT, you can do polynomial multiplication and division, and you would also use addition essentially. Okay, so these are the basic building block. Once you have these building block, you can look at the proof generation as calls to these functionalities. So this is what we'll be focusing on, and looking at building essentially the proof, the building MPC protocol for these, which are getting the distributed time that we envision from the servers. So that's going to be the target. And I would say the key tool that we use, so collaborative zk-SNARKs also identified this, but they essentially achieve this MPC by sharing using regular secret sharing, Shami secret sharing, and they show how to compute the MPC on top of the Shami shares. I would say the main, I think, add-on that we bring on is use of pack secret sharing. So pack secret sharing is this amazing primitive that helps you to reduce compute time, typically for like circuits that involve a lot of repetitions, called SIMD circuits. So for those kind of circuits, pack secret sharing has already been shown in literature to be useful to reduce essentially the compute time and stuff. So that's the tool that we are going to use. So just to recap for everyone here, what is pack secret sharing? For that, let's look at regular secret sharing, right? So what is regular secret sharing? It just takes value m and splits it amongst n parties, and so threshold t is a parameter that tells you how many of these parties can be corrupted and can come together, and even if like t parties come together, you cannot learn anything about t minus 1 parties come together, you can't learn anything about the secret, but beyond that, like if t are there, you can reconstruct the secret. That's the typical target that you achieve with secret sharing. And so you're only sharing one value, one message amongst n parties here, right? And typically for the semi-honest setting, the corruption threshold is that t is less than n by 2. Okay, so this is what you take, the maximum allowed. In comparison, for pack secret sharing, what you're doing is instead trying to share a vector of values. So just instead of sharing one message, you can like this is something that was achieved in 92, and the pack secret sharing tells you how to take L size vector and be able to do the same, essentially share it amongst n parties. So now whatever compute or anything you do doesn't correspond to one value but a vector of values. Okay, so that's essentially roughly why you're able to exploit this structure better. And so you can pack up to so the L can be order of n values, some n by epsilon values you can pack. And what is the trade-off? If you pack L values together, the trade-off comes in the corruption threshold. So now the corruption threshold, if you want it to be T, the corresponding bound that you need to satisfy is T plus L has to be less than n by 2. So however many values you choose to pack together, you correspondingly have to pay the compensation for in the corruption threshold. So for our setting, typically what works best is if you take L to be n by 4, in which case your corruption threshold will also be n by 4. N by 4 minus 1, but yeah. Up to n by 4 minus 1 parties can be corrupted. So that's typically an example where you can get I think optimal balance of the two. But essentially that's the play that you do. However many values you pack, those will correspond to how much saving you get in compute, but then you pay the price in terms of corruption threshold. So that's what pack secret sharing gives you. And once you have pack secret sharing, just as a sanity check, how do you do compute on them? On regular secret shares, we know how to do multiplication on top of it, addition on top of it. You can extend essentially the same thing over a vector of values. So if you just add the values, correspondingly the whole vector gets added. Okay, so this is just a sanity check you can do. And if you multiply the values, essentially the shares, each party locally multiplies. This corresponds to a 2t out of n pack secret sharing of the Hadamard product of the two vectors. Okay, so that's what this would give, and then typical MPC trick involves doing degree reduction to get back, which you can still do with pack secret sharing. Okay, so this is the tool that we would use at hand, and try to build essentially the distributed MPC protocols for these functionalities. Okay, so in the interest of time, like I won't get into all the details of how you do each of them, but let's look at the main one, like the cryptographic operation one at least. Okay, and I'll leave a note with respect to what is the challenge that we need to overcome. So that's, yeah.
Back secret sharing, there is also a disadvantage in computing the shares, but there is an advantage in reconstructing.
What do you mean there's a,
So when sharing,
yeah?
the computation should be more than standard secret.
No, so it's just like, think of it like, Shamir, what do? You just set the secret to be at the 0th location and then you pick other coefficients, right? This is just like a very simple extension from there. Think of like now L values as being set at some points of evaluation of the polynomial, and then the remaining ones you pick at random depending on your threshold, and you essentially build your polynomial in a similar way. So instead of just setting one value in your polynomial, embedding one value, you're embedding L values. That's how you should visualize. So in terms of computing, there is no difference actually. The secret sharing part is so similar. What you need to figure out when you use packet secret sharing is that when you do the computation on top, you have to be careful, like you're doing the compute on the vector of values, right? So as we would see, the key aspect is to identify what is the order in which you need to pack these things together so that your compute happens the way you want it. Otherwise, like the whole vector gets affected when you do some computation on a share, right? Instead of just one value. With one value, like things are linear. So for instance, FFT will be completely linear. You can do it locally. But with pack secret sharing, that's not the case. Even scalar multiplication will not be local, because you will have to look at the scalar multiplication as a vector in itself and do the compute essentially as a product or a multiplication. Okay, so that's the challenge that you need to take care of with pack secret sharing. So let's look at MSM. Recall this is the function we wanted to compute, right? Just product of gi to the alpha I, where gi's are the group elements. So the key observation here is, how do you share group elements? Okay, this is the first basic question, and this was already observed in Ozdemir and Bonnet's paper, which is to share essentially g power x, where g is the group element and x is the field element. What you do is compute the shares of the exponent, which we know how to do. It's a field element, and you do essentially secret sharing of the field element, and then you can just compute, g power the shares. So this notation I use for sharing, which means essentially all the shares that you give to the end parties. This is the notation I use for that, and this involves just each party think of just exponentiating over the whatever shares you get. Okay, so that's how you share a group element, and what we do for pack secret share is essentially just extend that for a vector of values. So to be able to do this, you will share essentially this vector of field elements, which is the corresponding exponents, and then you will essentially compute the g power of that. Okay, so once you have this, how to share the group element, now what is the problem at hand? So assume, let's say, you're taking m to be 32 for ease of, like just an example to take, and you pack vectors like basically with 4 values together. So your L is 4, let's say. Then this is how I'm, let's say, packing. This order is something that you need to set specific to the example. For computing MSM in itself, because of the way this operation works, you can just align them sequentially. So you pack the first 4, G1, G2, G3, G4, and then G5, G6, G7, G8, and so on. Like just consecutive elements you pack together for both the group and the field elements. Once you have that, observe that first step, the parties can just locally compute this MSM functionality on the shares that they have. What will that give? If they compute, why is this local first of all? Because recall this is an exponentiation, right? So when you do a compute, what are you doing? You're doing the operation on the shares corresponding to the exponent. You're not doing the operation on the group. And so whatever is the product of the group becomes a linear operation on the exponent, right? So this is going to be just a local operation that the parties can do on their shares, which is corresponding to their exponent. And once this operation is done, what happens here? Like the vectors get multiplied, right? Or the vectors get clubbed together. So what you will have is essentially a value of this form. G1 to the alpha 1 gets multiplied with G5 to the alpha 5. and so on up to G29 to the alpha 29. And similarly for each component, the second component of each vector. So what you get is a Hadamard product, right? That's what I'm basically iterating at. So this is the final share that a party would end up if it does a local computation on whatever it has. This is the share of what it ends up with. So what it needs to do now is be able to multiply all of this, right? We have only now, recall, one sharing, right? This is a L size vector and we'll only have one, like as opposed to so many vectors, everything got multiplied. So in the end you only have like something which is L sized, and in this case L is 4. So it's only four component vector that you have. So what you do is you just unpack these values at this stage. There is a protocol that takes you from a pack secret sharing back to regular shares, which means you can visualize each of them as being secret shared using a regular share, as you would know. And once you unpack and get these 4 values separately, then again it's just like a local compute, right? You are just able to multiply these and get, rather on the exponent it's just a linear operation, and you get this. So the key aspect to note here is you're able to essentially get a divide by however many values you pack together. So this kind of compute split allows you to get, instead of doing order of m multiplications or order of m operations, you're able to get down to order of m by l operations, because you're combining a lot of these products through these vectors. So if you just sit down and look at it, you'll see that you're essentially getting a divide of compute by L. And L is, remember, order of n. So depending on the number of servers you choose and what constant you pick for how many things to pack together, you can optimize in a way that you get the divide correspondingly. Okay. So in the interest of time, I'll not get into the FFT divide. We are able to do something similar, but what I want to just leave at it with respect to FFT compute is that this is the reason why we need the asymmetry in the server requirement. So FFT as an operation, we are not able to completely get through something with pack secret sharing that works essentially through all the recursive layers of FFT. At some point you need to break it out and then do a computation outside, and that kind of computation requires a single larger server to do order of m field operations. So this is why we need that asymmetry. So typically if you are able to, I'll get to the open problems, but if you try to use any of the non-FFT based SNARKs and, like, you know, let's say make pack secret sharing work on them, then this component we can get rid of. So you'll probably able to get a perfect divide amongst all servers, not just for compute but also for memory, if you're able to get rid of it. So even the memory asymmetry where one server requires memory proportional to m, that's also because of FFT. Because in FFT operation you typically need to store every level to do the compute at each recursive layer. Okay, so let me skip this and I'll just end with like quickly showing the implementation part. So what is the assumption with which we run? We assume the local prover with which we are comparing is like a 4 GB RAM, you know, one virtual CPU. All of them are N1 GCP Google Cloud Platform instances. The servers itself, the king server or the one large server has you know, a larger memory. So this is not something that's a 128 GB RAM is what we took, but you can, it's not something that you absolutely need. You can do with something smaller. The numbers that we show is for 128 GB RAM, and the remaining servers can just be 2 GB RAM each. Okay, so this is the setup that we run the protocol with, and this first set of graph for groth 16 long, what it shows is that first of all the blue line is what our running time shows. Fix the number of servers, let's say you take 128 servers and you vary essentially the constraints and see how much time things take. Okay, so that's what this graph shows. So for this we pack, let's say 32. As I said, the optimal setup we take is n by 4 things packed together. So n is 128 and we pack 32 things together, which brings your corruption threshold to 31. Okay, so for this, the blue line is what we get as the compute time, and the orange line is what a local prover would compute, a single prover would compute. So that's the saving we get, and this split that you see here is what I was mentioning before. The red part, which is the heaviest part of the computation, is actually the cryptographic operation. So all of them come from the MSM computations. And the yellow part is actually the field operation. So in spite of all this UNQ with FFT requiring a separate thing and all of that, actually if you see, The MSM part is the major thing, and that's why we get the speed up in spite of not being able to completely divide the field operations. That's why, yeah.
Does the time involve network communication?
Yeah, everything included, yeah. I mean, so as I mentioned, like every server doesn't need to communicate with or the only kind of communication that happens is when the shares are sent to the king server and it reconstructs, does something and sends back the sharing. So that's the kind of,
Where all the servers to be connected with some high bandwidth?
with some, yeah. So bandwidth, I'll show you the differences that occur when you vary the bandwidth, yeah. And the other good part, like because to some extent we are able to split the memory amongst the smaller servers, what we can see is the weaker servers can handle actually 16 times more constraint than what a typical single consumer machine would hold. So here if you see, the single prover stops somewhere here, but we are able to tolerate a larger constraint size. So if you get to a stage where you get more memory split and you don't run out of space, then you can go beyond that essentially. That's the vision for this. And so I mentioned that we get a divide by L, right? Which was 32. So you should have gotten a 32x speed up. Why not 32x? That I partly mentioned to you, which is one of them is FFT, because you don't get a complete divide for the field operations. So there's some slowdown because of that. And the other is right now, as our implementation stands, there's no barrier we see, but we don't incorporate in the distributed protocol the optimization of group operations, which is Pip-and-Just algorithm, which is typically used for multiscalar multiplications. This optimization we didn't incorporate in the distributed protocol. There's no barrier as such we see, but we didn't incorporate it in the implementation. So these are the two reasons why the speed up is, I would say, lower than what you would expect theoretically. And lastly, just this is to answer your question with respect to bandwidth. If I just keep the number of constraints fixed, let's say 2 power 19, and packing constant and number of corrupt servers is same, and I vary the number of parties, these are different lines with respect to the bandwidth that you take. So if you took 64 Mbps versus 256 versus 4 Gbps, this shows essentially how the time for computing the proof differs. And here the blue line is basically what you would get if you had perfect division, and the baseline is essentially what a single prover does. Okay, so just to conclude, like there are some interesting open problems, some of which are like very attainable. One of them is to, as I said, remove this need for king server. Okay, so for this you can try thinking of non-FFT based SNARKs, something like hyperplonk, which is a variant of plonk but gets rid of using FFT in the proof generation. And there are some other SNARKs in literature that get concrete efficiency without using FFT, which involves Chaya's question also, some of the linear prover time SNARKs. So hyperplonk is a linear prover time SNARK which is able to do this. So if we are able to extend this and generate something for that setup, we would be able to potentially get rid of this asymmetry in the server need. And more so than that, you will also be able to get a perfect split of the memory usage. So that's actually much more crucial, because when you run out of memory, then you are able to handle much lesser constraint size than what you would theoretically anticipate. And the next is, I think, getting malicious security, which again is something that we think can be added on. It's not like a direct thing that you can plug in. Hi.
Is it Anjali?
Yes, hi. Hello. I can't hear, I don't know who is talking. Can you see on chat who is talking? Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. So malicious security is one thing that is pending here. And the other thing is, like, to completely envision even the part of doing the extended witness, you have to incorporate and somewhat do end-to-end implementation if you want to envision actually this being useful for applications, which also people are actually started doing. Like, it's not something that's far away yet. I mean, doing this is also an interest right now that several people have taken up. So yeah, that's all. This is the paper you can find online, and the implementation is on GitHub. Thank you.
So even though the end goal is to get 70 on servers, but since there is already a king server right now, possible to use some of that, to exploit some of that asymmetry even for the probability operations and get more speed up?
For cryptographic operations, actually, you don't want, like, even if one of the servers is doing compute that's proportional to m, then like you won't get the speed up essentially. For if you do it for field operations, because they are anyways the lesser, the less heavy part of the SNARK proof generation, it's fine. It doesn't mess up with your compute time as much. But if you do it for cryptographic operations, and even if one server needs to do that much, then I don't think you will get any saving.
I guess just following up on that, you can give it 22x speed up, right? But the king server is 96x times powerful.
Right, yeah.
So you would think that maybe it can do the 22x extra order because trusted.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So you don't, of course, want to like just delegate everything to it. You will do most of, which is, like I said, F50 is the block, right? So F50 also, there is a lot of those.
The other direction.
Right.
Last game, like, explore the king server's power more. Is there maybe with that 96x, or maybe could have pushed some?
Even with that power, I think for cryptographic operations, in general, like if you try to use just one server to do a proportion.
It will be something, but
Something more than what it's doing right now, like. So actually, I think like the good part is, regardless of it, just like because you're able to get this amazing like perfect split of MSM anyways, MSM is the only operation. So there is no like as such need where you would think that
the right direction to go would be to get rid of that.
yeah.
But given, I think Karthik's question is, given that it's there, could you?
I don't know, with this protocol I don't see, but maybe if there is another MSM protocol that the way MSM is implemented, maybe, I don't know. So I don't know, like with Pippinger optimization, like whether you would be, maybe you would need some asymmetry that you need to exploit. I don't know yet. Like we didn't implement using just the, like Pippinger is done whenever locally a party does MSM, but globally when you're doing something, then that optimization is not incorporated in the distributed setup. Yeah.
Does the number of servers need to be a power of 2 instead of 128?
Yeah, it needs to be because of F50, like the way operations are, you need to choose it to be a power.
The schemes you use, Plonk 16 and Plonk, they have a trusted setup. Plonk is universal, but
Yeah.
then you're limited by the duality of the.
Yeah,
So then for things like video editing, the number of constraints, I saw 2x21 was the max.
right.
Like SHA-256, one compression takes about 25,000 constraints. So that's about 2x, let's say 15.
Right.
I mean,
So this is just like a start step. Like I said, I think you need to go beyond. The current SNARKs that we are considering. Like you'll have to consider other SNARKs that do much better. And if you're able to get like full divide of things, I think we will be able to handle much larger constraint size.
have you looked at the folding scheme based SNARKs like Nova?
Yeah. Yeah.
Those seem like unending amount of computation can be folded into one instance.
Right.
So, but I don't know if it can be we can distribute it on the server.
Yeah, I think at least right now the constraint system and the kind of structure that those SNARKs assume, I don't see how we will be able to do. Right now, I think as a first step, we're just looking at these linear prover time SNARKs that don't use F50. They themselves have some advantages, like even if you pay the price a little bit in proof size and verification time, at least with respect to the prover time, like you have some nicer features from them. So if we use those, we already envision that there's something much better that we can achieve with respect to the constraint size.
Question is there any kind of work or any useful direction where, since you anyway have servers, and if the verifier also trusts that there's an odds majority, that you can just have the servers do MPC and that might be much faster than this, or so it's not SNARK anymore, right? It's
Oh,
just
I see.
MPC.
Okay.
Okay. And MPC, there are constant rate MPC.
Yeah.
So, which does all this pack signature and everything.
I don't think there is any work that I know of that.
Then in principle, it could be just NPC by itself. It's enough. But
Right.
It's not that standardized.
Yeah.
I guess what you're getting here is a verifier doesn't need to trust anything.
Yeah, verify doesn't need to. Yeah, exactly.
Who will trust the-
Right. So like any of the security add-on is like because the verifier doesn't need to trust and all like.
That's just a setup, right?
Sure. Setup, I mean, whatever is the underlying SNARK assumption that's retained, you need to have that initial trusted setup. But beyond that, you don't need to with respect to whatever we are adding on top of that. The only thing, like, so that that's why, like, whatever security, like malicious, we don't get, but the soundness will not be affected in any of this, right? Because that just is like whatever the underlying SNARK has. Yeah. Thank you.